There was a moment, just one, when I pressed my palm flat against that crumbling stone wall and felt something change inside me. Not a sound, not a vibration, just a sudden hollow stillness beneath my hand that told me the wall wasn't solid, that something was on the other side. And when they finally broke it open, what we found proved that someone inside this church had hidden a murder for over 100 years. I want you to stay with me until the very end of this story, because by the time I'm finished, you'll understand something I had to learn the hard way: that some secrets survive longer than the people who created them, and the only thing more dangerous than discovering one is deciding what to do with it. To understand why I was standing beside that ancient wall with stone dust on my hands and tears in my eyes, I need to take you back to where this all truly began. My name is Sister Margaret. I entered the convent when I was 23 years old, and by the time this story starts, I had lived quietly within those walls for over 2 decades. My life was gentle, predictable. I woke before sunrise, prayed, helped with correspondence, taught basic literacy to women in the parish program, and spent every spare hour I could find inside the church archives. That last part, the archives, that was my real love. Old documents, faded ledgers, water-stained baptism records going back to the 1700s. Most people found those rooms dusty and depressing. I found them sacred. Every name on every page was a person who had actually lived, who had prayed in the same building I prayed in. I believed deeply that forgotten history deserved a witness. I never imagined that belief would pull me into something this dark. St. Dominic's Church was over 200 years old. It sat on the edge of a small Pennsylvania town that most people only pass through on their way somewhere else. The building had beautiful bones, old stone masonry, arched windows, a bell tower that hadn't functioned in decades, but the years had not been kind to the east wing. There were visible cracks running along the lower walls, deteriorating mortar, sections where moisture had quietly done its damage for generations. The diocese finally authorized restoration work in the spring, and because of my background cataloging the church's historical records, I was asked to assist with documentation during the process. My job was simple: photograph anything historically significant before the restoration crew altered it. Simple. That was the word they used. The restoration team started with the east transept wall, a long interior section that ran behind the oldest confessionals. The lead contractor, a quiet man named Paul, noticed immediately that the wall's depth didn't match the architectural plans on file. According to the original blueprints from 1887, that interior wall should have been 8 inches thick, but when Paul measured it, he found it was closer to 22 inches. He mentioned it to me almost casually, like it was probably just sloppy historical record keeping. I didn't think it was sloppy record keeping. That evening, I went back to the archives alone. I pulled every document connected to the East Wing building permits, repair logs, donation records, correspondence between former pastors. And buried inside a box that hadn't been opened since at least the 1970s, I found a construction invoice dated October 1921. It was a bill for stone and mortar. An interior wall, the invoice said. Emergency structural reinforcement. The problem was, there was no record of any structural emergency at St. Dominic's in 1921. No damage report, no diocese notification, nothing. Just a quiet bill paid in cash, signed by a pastor who had died 6 months later. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I started pulling local newspaper archives from 1920 and 1921 at the county library. I wasn't entirely sure what I was looking for. I just had this feeling, the kind that settles into your chest and refuses to leave. On a Tuesday afternoon in the second week of searching, I found it. A small article buried on page 7 of the October 14th, 1921 edition of the local paper. A woman named Cecilia Voss, aged 29, had gone missing from the town that same month. Her husband had reported her absence. The church was briefly mentioned because she had been a devoted parishioner who volunteered there regularly. Cecilia Voss had never been found. I sat in that library chair for a long time without moving. I kept thinking about the invoice, the wall, the timing, and I kept telling myself I was wrong, that I was a nun with too much imagination and not enough sleep, that a missing woman and a thickened wall were simply a coincidence separated by 100 years. But then I went back to the archive box. Underneath the construction invoice, folded so carefully that I had initially mistaken it for part of the box lining, was a single piece of paper, a letter, written in a woman's handwriting. It was addressed to no one by name. It simply began, "I am afraid he will not stop." The letter described a woman who had been confiding in a pastor about abuse at the hands of someone powerful in the parish community. She wrote that this person had threatened her, that she feared what would happen if she tried to leave. The letter was unsigned, but at the bottom, in different ink added later, I was certain were 4 words written in what appeared to be the same handwriting as the construction invoice. "She will not speak." My hands were shaking. I photographed the letter 3 times. I sat with it for an hour before I told anyone. The priest I reported to, Father Brendan, was a cautious and careful man. He listened to everything I presented, the invoice, the article, the letter, the wall measurements. And then, very gently, he told me I should be careful about drawing conclusions, that these were fragments, that the church's reputation was something to consider, that I should pray on it. I understood what he meant, and I respected his caution, but I couldn't stop. I reached out to a local historian named Dr. Ruth Hayden, a retired professor who had written papers on the town's early 20th century community. She became the ally I hadn't expected. Ruth told me that Cecilia Voss's family had always believed she didn't simply leave, that a nephew, now elderly and living in a care facility in Ohio, had spoken about it his whole life. Ruth helped me reach him. His name was Thomas. He was 91 years old and his memory came in fragments. But some things he remembered with painful clarity. He told me that Cecilia had been involved with the church's charitable committee, that she had discovered financial fraud money being quietly redirected from the parish's poverty fund into private accounts, that when she threatened to go to the diocese, a man named Gerald Harwick, a wealthy and deeply connected parish elder, had told her she would regret it. Gerald Harwick. I went back to the 1921 newspaper archives with that name. It took me 3 days, but I found it. A brief social notice from December 1921, 2 months after the wall was built and 2 months after Cecilia disappeared. Gerald Harwick had made a significant donation to St. Dominic's Church for structural improvements. I felt sick, I felt heartbroken, and I felt more certain than I had ever felt about anything in my life. I brought everything to Paul, the contractor, and asked him directly. If something had been placed inside that wall before the stone was laid, would it still be there after 100 years? He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said possibly, if the space was sealed tight enough. It was stone, not wood. Stone doesn't consume what it covers. I went to Father Brendan again. This time I didn't ask for permission. I laid every document in front of him, including the letter, including Thomas's testimony recorded by Dr. Hayden, including the financial connection between Harwick and the construction, and I told him that if Cecilia Voss was inside that wall, she deserved to be found, that she had tried to do the right thing and someone had silenced her inside a place that was supposed to protect people. I told him that the church failing her once was already enough. We could not fail her again. He was quiet for a very long time. Then he made a phone call to the diocese. 3 weeks later, with proper authorities present, the east transept wall was carefully opened. I stood back while they worked. I was praying. I was terrified. I was holding on to the small folded letter in my coat pocket like it was something I needed to protect. When Paul turned and looked at me from across the room, I already knew. I could see it in his face. Behind the wall, sealed inside a narrow cavity that should not have existed, they found the remains of a young woman. Tucked beside her was a small cloth bag containing 2 items, a silver cross on a fine chain, and a folded piece of paper that forensic historians would later confirm was a handwritten record of the financial fraud Cecilia Voss had documented before she died. She had kept the evidence. She had held on to it even when she understood what it would cost her. Cecilia Voss had been murdered, and someone inside this church had helped bury her and then built a wall around the truth. Gerald Harwick had died in 1952. The pastor who signed the invoice had died in 1921. There would be no courtroom, no arrest, no sentence handed down, and I had to sit with that. I had to find a way to hold justice and grief in the same breath without letting one destroy the other. What happened after was slow and sacred. Cecilia's descendants were contacted. A small memorial service was held. Her name was added to the church's permanent historical record. The diocese issued a formal public acknowledgement of what had been done and what had been covered. It was not enough. It could never be entirely enough. But it was something. It was her name spoken clearly in the place that had tried to erase her. For me, something shifted permanently. I had entered this work believing that history was something you preserved quietly. I left it understanding that some history fights back, that some truths press against the walls built around them for 100 years until someone finally listens. I still pray in that church. I still walk past the East Wing every day. The wall is repaired now, restored, clean stone, but I know what was behind it. And I know that Cecilia knew, even in her last moments, that what she was carrying mattered. She held onto that evidence. She refused to let the truth disappear even when everything else was taken from her. Walls can hide secrets for generations, but the truth never stops looking for a way out. Sometimes all it needs is one person willing to press their hand against the stone and feel that hollow place underneath. One person willing to say something is wrong here. One person with the courage to keep asking even when everyone around them says to stop. Cecilia deserved that person a century ago. I'm just glad she finally found one. I want to ask you something before you go. Do you believe every buried secret should eventually be revealed no matter how much time has passed, no matter who it might affect? I truly want to know what you think. Leave your answer in the comments below, because this is a question I still think about every single day. And if this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something, please share it with someone who believes that truth still matters, even after 100 years, especially after 100 years.